Welcome back to Briggs on Books, our international show where we talk to authors all over the world about their books and publications. And we also get to talk to people who publish books, people who help edit books, people who help people get them published, people who create covers. There's so many things that go into a book. And all of you out there who do anything like that, you're invited to be on the show. In fact, our next guest is coming to us from across the United States in New Jersey, Alexandra McGroarty. Welcome, Alexandra.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Now, your book is called Now What? No.
So Now What?
So Now What,
Yep.
yeah. And it's kind of a little bit of a sad, is it a sad book?
So it's an uplifting book. It's about a quote-unquote sad topic, right? Grief. Everybody goes through it. But it takes a look at how we harness our grief and do positive things with it.
Yeah. And you told me before we came on the air that you'd lost your husband.
Yes.
And that you look for books to help, and you found things maybe complex or from psychologists, but not a lot from people coming from where you were.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm an avid reader, and I love to write. And so my first thought was, okay, I need to go find a resource for me. And when I was looking, there was a lot spiritual based, a lot about heaven or the afterlife, depending on what you believe. There was a lot from psychologists who studied grief, but there wasn't a ton out there from somebody that's went through it themselves, that their world was turned upside down and here's who they navigated through it. And so my intent was to be that person, to be that writer for other people that was a mom and a wife and a daughter, and overnight was a single parent and a business owner by themselves now. And how did they navigate that? How did I navigate that and make it to the other side?
Very good. Now, who should read? By the way, let's look at the cover as we're talking about this. Who should read this book?
I am a proponent of anybody that's either going through the grief journey or somebody that has to support somebody going through the grief journey. There's a lot in the book that talks about the ways in which we support somebody that's going through grief. And grief doesn't have to be a death. It can be a loss in another way, a marriage that breaks up or a relationship that breaks up, a loss in job, anything. But how do you support someone going through that? And then it talks about if you yourself are going through it, here are some ways in which you can navigate that experience.
Yeah, and that was my thought. It doesn't have to be somebody who's lost a spouse. Anybody who knows somebody who has lost a spouse, which is everyone pretty much,
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely.
I never know what to say. And people always say, oh, I know how she feels. I know how you feel. People don't know how you feel, do they?
No, they don't. And I think that I try to come from a place where everybody has the best intentions, but it's a really uncomfortable topic, especially when we're talking about death, right? We are in a death-denying culture.
Yeah.
We do everything we can to lengthen our lives, and we do as little as we can to talk about what comes next. And so everybody's super uncomfortable when we get to that aspect. And so this is meant to guide you on how you either support that person or how you get through it yourself.
Yeah. In my family, we always just, when we lose somebody, we never spoke with them again or never talked about what it meant to us or anything. We just ignored it. But I don't think that's the best way to handle something like this.
No, not at all. And I think when you're in that first stages of death, you go through all of the traditional stages of death, or you can be in loss and you can be in more than one at the same time. And ignoring can be a coping mechanism, but it's not healthy long term, right? And so we talk about here are the different stages of grief that you could be going through. Here's what could be helpful along the way while you're in those stages. Here's how to recognize those stages in others and how to support that transition.
Yeah. Now, did you do a lot of research?
I did, yeah. And so it's definitely from a personal perspective. There's a lot of personal stories we've done, but did a lot of research to see how other cultures and other religions around the world experience death. And it's really interesting to see. It's interesting to see how loss can be a celebration in a certain area of the world versus how we view it as a very negative time in our lives, in the life of the individual that we've lost. And so it was interesting to weave those points together in a story.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, looking at how other cultures handle death and maybe a celebration, different approach.
Right.
So, yeah, and I like the idea of people around the grieving person reading this book. I think it would be a big help.
Yeah, we spent some time in the book to even say, okay, if you're with a person in a funeral line, here's what you can say to them. If you're with a person one-on-one, here's what you can say to them. If you're in a group and you just don't know what to say, here's some of the things that are helpful versus some of the things that we traditionally say that might not be so helpful.
So everybody should read this book.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
I'm going
Exactly.
to. I avoid people sometimes who've lost someone. I don't think that's a thing to do either, because
No, it's not, but it's so normal in,
Yeah.
in our culture, right? It's very uncomfortable. We don't know what to say. We don't want to put our foot in our mouth. We don't want to make it worse for that person.
Right.
And so if we don't have the right words, avoiding is the next best thing.
yeah. Where do people get this book?
So it's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It's also available through the publisher, Atmosphere Press.
Atmosphere Press, okay. Now, we have your Instagram. In fact, I have some interns who go out to Instagram. I always say, just find the interesting people who've really got something to tell us. And that's where they found you. So you're accessible on Instagram, apparently.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Yep, at McGroarty_author.
By the way, there's an element that you mentioned, and somebody losing their spouse has to be so tough and so sad, and as you say, so many stages of grief. Do you address the children, how people?
Yes, I do. And so we spend a whole chapter talking about how do you help a child grieve with you, right, from a loss, and whether they're a toddler, a baby, a young adult, a teenager, what does that look like? And then I'm also coming out with a children's book in the next month, Until We Meet Again, Leo, and that is going to specifically focus on the grief journey for children, I would say ages 6 through 9.
Yeah. I would imagine with a young child, you would really want them to remember that parent. Any little
Absolutely.
speck of memory would just be so valuable. So.
Absolutely. And I think it's different depending on the stage of life you're in, right? The conversations that you're having with a toddler are very different from the conversations that you're having with a teenager. And so
Yeah.
we wanted to spend meaningful time talking through what that looks like.
Yeah. And by the way, I know many teenagers who never got talked to about their grief at all.
Absolutely.
I just read Prince Harry's book, by the way, and that was really messed him up, that nobody reached out to him or talked to him about losing his mother.
Absolutely. Again, it goes back to that uncomfortability that we have with those types of discussions, right? We don't necessarily have all the answers, so we avoid those types of conversations.
Yeah. Well, I would tell our audience to order the book, but order 10 of them and give them out. Be ready to give them out. I always have to go to so many parties and events all the time. I always like to take a hostess gift, and here's a good idea for anyone, I think. So.
Absolutely. I think the major part of the story is to lean into your grief. Grief isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's the love that we've had for an individual or an experience that we get to take with us. And so to harness that and be able to do good is the ultimate way to honor them.
Yeah, it's incredible. By the way, what will people find at your website, alexandramcgroarty.com?
Correct. So all of my books are there. I have books in other spaces outside of grief as well. So you'll see that on the website. You'll see any media appearances and speaker appearances that I have, and blogs as we start to post them.
Oh, good. And can people contact you there if they have a question?
They can, yes.
Yeah.
There is a form there. My email address is there as well. You'll get to learn a little bit about me and my experiences on the site too.
Very good. I'm going to go check that site out. Anything else you want our viewers to know?
I just thank you so much for having me today. I think it's a great resource to be able to start the conversation on grief. It's not the only conversation, right? It's just a starting point. And I think specifically if you're working with children or young adults that are going through grief, I think this next story on Until We Meet Again, Leo, is a great resource for them.
And by the way, there's nobody who's not going to experience grief. It's just part of being alive, and most of us have no idea how to handle it, and this book sounds like it's a very good start.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you for coming on. I want to have you back again.
Sounds great. Thank you.
I'm going to get the book and I'm going to read it, then we'll talk about it some more.
Sounds great.
Thank you, Alexandra. And
Thanks for having me.
We'll be back with more Briggs on Books right after this.